Have you ever looked at like an honest-to-God art book, like the kind that you'd find in the store, like dedicated to a single artist? You know, like they're usually like hardback, glossy pages. That's what I used to do back in the day. Is I'd sit in Barnes and Noble for like hours. You know, back when they had such things, and they had a very extensive art section at that point in time, and it was full of books on individual artists, and like. You could go in there and sit down and look at, there's some Max Ernst, there's some Salvador Dali, Rene Magritte, H.R. Geiger, and they actually had such an extensive section of this stuff that I actually discovered artists just by going to Barnes & Noble and looking at that stuff. Like, and that's what I used to do with my money back then. It's like whenever I got money for like a birthday or something, I would save it up and I would use it to buy more art books. And like I found out about Josh Kirby that way. That's how I first saw Joe Jusko's stuff. I saw his Barsoom illustrations. Like that was the first time I'd ever heard of a Princess of Mars. It was like a major inspiring moment. Like it was like this wonderful wellspring of things, you know, that I'd never seen before. That's what that was at that time. I mean, nowadays, if you go into a Barnes & Noble so-called art section, if there's anything, you know, in it at all, it's like art instruction books. Like you can draw manga, you can draw furries, and like napkin folding, stuff on furniture arrangement and photography, and you know, which is all well and good too. But it doesn't really make it into an art section. Not to be too crusty. But that was I always really enjoyed art books, like actually, you know, having in your hands. Like it's easy to like grab, you know, images off of Google Images and stuff like that in the store. I mean, you can still see them, but you know, but I feel like it is a different experience, like to have it printed out on a page, you know, like subject to light and such, you know, like a little bit more tactile. And I still have, you know, piled up in various places all the art books that I used to save up for back then. And once in a great while, I will still buy one these days. Mostly when I buy books, it's like it's usually you know, small paperbacks for fiction. You know, that's where I've been directing my obsession lately. But art books are terrific, and it's, you know, it's fuel for the imagination. And you know, for the artist, it's inspiration, and it, you know, gives you impressions of what's possible, you know. That's I guess that's about how I spent basically the entirety of the 1990s. It was scraping together money and getting more art books. You know, starting with Salvador Dali and then onwards from there. But a lot of that, you know, informed, you know, what I thought I wanted to do. And, you know, I thought I could sort of be this bigwig surrealist. Even though the movement essentially isn't in existence at this time. And when I first came to DeviantArt, that was a lot of what I tried to do. As I tried to you know, forage more into surrealism, and try to do some of the H.R. Geiger kind of post-industrial, you know, like very rusty stuff with lots of, you know, like skeletal elements, lots of bodies, body horror possibly. Just really random, sort of rusty / organic. And I spent a lot of time trying to be him, and I don't think it ever really caught on. I just wound up being me, but that's fine too. A few years ago, I wanted to just branching sort of exclusively into fantasy, so it's more like Frank Frazetta, Michael Whalen, maybe a little bit Joe Driscoll, although his style was sort of it's a little harsher maybe. A lot of people bring up Boris Vallejo. Boris Vallejo is another one I used to see quite a lot back in the day. It's in the art section. And, you know, Boris obviously is an artist of undeniable ability. You know, he also graces a lot of book covers, so I still see his stuff quite frequently. very distinct from Frazetta in a few ways, though. And Frazetta, usually had a little bit more of a rough edge, more in love with contrast. Was a little bit. You might say Frazetta stuff had more of a masculine quality to it, if you wanted to really simplify it. The interesting thing about Boris Vallejo stuff is that there's almost never black. The shade black, there's always, the fill is always some other color. If you squint, you're not looking too close. It's like, there's still a contrast, obviously, but there's no black, and there's usually very little in the way of hard shadows. It's more about highlights, more about softness. Whereas Frazetta, it's all sort of cut out in shadow. And that's something I had to sort of work up to, Now, for a lot of people, a lot of digital artists anyway, like a shadow is just something you throw on under your figure at the end, possibly on a photographic backdrop. A lot of people are intimidated by doing backgrounds. I guess a lot of people don't really attempt them. They'll just sort of do characters, do figures, and they're and they're good at those. And I feel like the same principles apply to both. But they'll just do the figure, and they'll either slap it on a photo, possibly out of focus, or they'll just they'll have the figure again in the background, like larger, desaturated, slightly blurred, possibly. When I first came to DA, and a lot of my stuff was more character based. I did a few of these things, like I'd use photographic backgrounds and stuff. But I've never been super uncomfortable with drawing backgrounds either, with landscapes and such. You just kind of keep going, most things really are just repeating elements. You can just kind of let your pen go nuts, like if you're drawing, say, leaves, rocks, any kind of texture, really. Anything that amalgamates. You just sort of pile it on. The thing about shadows is that it requires decision. You got to determine the light source. You got to determine how bright is it? Is it daylight? What kind of a day is it? Is it slightly overcast? Is it summery? Are these warm shadows? Are they soft shadows? I don't know. Maybe that's an intimidating factor. Maybe that's why it took me a while to come to it myself. A certain somebody kept pointing out to me, it's like, you got highlights, but you got no shadows. It's undefined. And after a while, I gave in. I'm always very slow to give in. Not at becoming quality, I will admit. Apologies for the drawing videos being slow in coming here. It's always real life factors. On art books, though, for those of you who want such things, don't go to a Barnes & Noble, obviously. Get into a used bookstore or something. Get to a half-price books outlet, whatever you got locally. That's always what's best. Something that's actually available. In that particular venue, the price will not break your bank. Even if you don't go in there with anything in mind, I recommend perusing it, see if anything grabs your attention. It might prove worthwhile. I still thumb through mine every now and then. Don't always read the text in between, I'm loath to admit, but sometimes the images, how they relate to one another, the sequence. Some art books are stunningly well curated. The way they're put together, it's an art in itself. And other ones, it's just kind of a cheapy Taschen one that you just grabbed, just cause. The great thing about the H.R. Giger ones is that he was alive to make those books himself. He was heavily involved in the process. The text inside is by him. You get autobiographical details. He tells about dreams and stuff and the things that inspired him. And those books are really expensive now that he's dead. I guess they were always a little bit expensive, though. Back in the 90s, I had to save up for them. They'd be like 60, 70 bucks a piece. But it's well worth it. The big coffee table sized ones, like Necronomicons 1 and 2 and Biomechanics. Those are just fucking stunning. I believe Dali had some that he was alive for as well, which, of course, are also expensive. I remember an art teacher of mine had some of those, and I do see them, like, sometimes when I get down to Powell's, but I don't usually pull the trigger on those just because it would take too much of my book money up. If you're a reader, like I have become, you know, that's generally what books are more for, and it's what you're going to spend your money on. But, you know, if art, or getting into creating art is something that interests you, I would recommend investing in some art books, or at least paging through some art books, you know, getting obsessed, forgetting quite what you saw, doing something based on your vague recollection of it. Like, you know, from back in the 90s when I first looked into an H.R. Geiger book, you know, like, I remember, like, there's images that I saw at that time on that day that haunted me since then. They've been more or less in the back of my mind, even though I moved on to other forms, generally speaking. But, you know, that's how it went for me, and so too may it go for you, for all I know. Anything's possible. Plus, they're just pretty to look at. Just gotta kind of plug away at these damn things. I guess this is a little tedious for some folks. Just fleshing it out. Especially, you're sort of behind the 8 ball when you try it my way, when you try to work to existing lines. That would make sense. But like they said in the How to Draw Tank Girl comic strip, then you just color the bastard. I figure that's about good.